Released in Japan on October 1996 for the Sega Saturn, Lunar Silver Star Story was a remake of 1992's Incarnation for the Sega CD. Except this time around, they would add more to it. The obvious changes were of course the graphical enhancements, the addition of new anime cutscenes that were much more dialogue heavy. There was 4 times more speaking roles in this game than the previous one, because they had also added new characters to it. There was the addition of new music, and there was much more fleshing out of the story and characters in this version. Working Designs had initially planned to release the game on the Saturn under the name Lunar Silver Star Story Director's Cut, but due to their conflict with Sega and Stoller, they would hold off and decided to release it on the PlayStation instead. Under the new name Lunar Silver Star Story Complete, it would be Working Designs' most ambitious undertaking thus far, and in June of 1999 it would be released. Essentially it is still the same game with a slightly altered story and some new elements, but in some respects it actually feels like an entirely different game. So when Working Designs released it over here as Lunar Silver Star Story Complete, that's a pretty good way to describe it, because not only did it feel like a complete game, it felt like a complete experience. Aside from the game discs, Working Designs would pack in more supplemental material with this than any other game before. The success of Lunar Silver Star Story Complete would help reintroduce Working Designs to a much bigger audience, now that RPGs had become more mainstream.
Lunar Silver Star Story Complete came with a cloth map, a hardbound book, soundtrack, making of CD-ROM. I mean, Victor Ireland infused himself into every aspect of the production of this.
The localization for these games, the packaging, the extra features, all of the additional information and love that basically Working Designs put into these games made me play it all over again. It was basically like playing the game with no knowledge. It was like I was in a completely new experience, though it was familiar.
They up-resed visuals, they cleaned up gameplay elements, they put some real care into the presentation and the production of this.
Much like how Lunar the Silver Star for the Sega CD was the first time a lot of people played a Working Designs game, Silver Star Story Complete on the PlayStation became that for a whole new crowd of people. It also reminded people who Working Designs was and introduced them to people that had never even heard of them before. After the breakout of Lunar on the PlayStation, Working Designs would cap off an eventful year with the December release of Silhouette Mirage. In Silhouette Mirage, you take control of this chibi-style character named Sheena, and this is a side-scrolling shooter/beat-em-up, and it's got a unique mechanic to it, where you use Sheena's dual Silhouette and Mirage ability to fight her enemies. For example, if you come across an enemy that is a Silhouette, you use Mirage, which is her default ability for attacking when you're facing the right. And when it's a Mirage enemy, you use her Silhouette skill facing left. Of course, you have the option to switch this attribute as well as get items, weapons, and upgrades. There was also a way for you to access a special 5-minute trailer of Lunar 2 by holding the L1 button right after starting up your PlayStation. The year 2000 was to be Working Designs' most productive year with Sony and as a company. They would release 3 games on the PlayStation and publish their first game on Sony's newest console, the PlayStation 2. It would all begin on the PlayStation in July with Vanguard Bandits. Originally, this game was known in Japan as Epica Stella, and initially, Working Designs wanted to title the game Detonator Gauntlet, but due to the fact that Midway owned the rights to the Gauntlet name, they had to change it in order to avoid being sued, so they ended up calling it Vanguard Bandits, and it's a tactical RPG where you take control of this young man named Bastion, who uses this large mecha called an ATAC to fight his enemies, who also use ATACs. And one of the more unique things about this game is that you could choose to go down one of 3 different branching scenarios that led you to multiple endings. So it gave this game a lot of replay value. For their PlayStation 2 debut, they decided on releasing Gun Griffin Blaze, the third game of the popular Gun Griffin franchise. Working Designs brought back their Ultra Series label for this game. It is a first-person view mech piloting combat game, and it's a very underrated game, actually. One of the best of its kind on the PlayStation 2. Graphic-wise, it's not the best, but it makes up for it with gameplay and with story. And what you do is you collect points in this game, and with them, you could unlock new scenarios, you could unlock new weapons, as well as unlocking new mecha. In November, the third game of the Ray series, Ray Crisis, would make its landing on the PlayStation.
While Ray Storm was released under the Spaz label, the last game to receive the Spaz label was the follow-up Ray Crisis.
The trilogy of these side-scrolling shooters would be completed with this game, but even though it was the third game in the series, it was actually a prequel to Ray Force. And to end the year again on another high note, in December, Working Designs released Lunar 2 Eternal Blue Complete.
Again, no surprise, a top seller on the PlayStation platform.
So Working Designs finds itself in a familiar place once again, and that is front and center of the RPG gaming community with the release of Lunar 2 Eternal Blue Complete. And the improvements that were made from the Sega CD version of the game were, of course, the graphics, the addition of new anime cutscenes with more dialogue, new music, and who can forget, even more supplemental material this time. You get the addition of the Omake box, the addition of Lucia's pendant, and what probably people remember the most was the pre-order item, which is one of the stranger, if not more interesting, pre-order items at least I've ever gotten, and that is the Master Galleon puppet.
There were a lot of interesting tie-ins to this game, and there was even a puppet brought out for it, a Galleon puppet.
2001 would be a little less eventful for Working Designs. They would only publish one game in April, Sylphid, The Lost Planet. This was the last side-scrolling shooter that Working Designs released, and it's actually a pretty good one. Just like they had done with previous releases, they made some improvements to this game. They added a vibrational function, analog control, as well as fixing a lot of the slowdown that you experienced in this game when many enemies were on the screen. After Sylphid, it would be 1 year before Working Designs would release their next game. The long-awaited Arc the Lad series would finally see the light of day in America.
By 2002, one of the last releases put out by Working Designs was the immense Arc the Lad collection.
The Arc the Lad games are strategy RPGs, and each one is a direct continuation of the previous one. In each game, you take control of a different main character. In the first game, of course, you take control of the titular Arc. The second game, you take control of Elk. And in the third game, you take control of Alec. The other game that was released as a part of this set was Arc Arena, which was kind of like a Monster Rancher / Pokemon type battle game.
It was 6 game discs, the now ubiquitous making of video CD. This was pretty unique, the idea of this is how we made the game put out into a game. It came with analog stick covers, it came with standees based on the characters.
These had long been standout games in Japan, especially in the early days of the PlayStation, because they really showcased the capabilities of the PlayStation with the CGI work, with the fact that the characters, when they did their attacks, they had these unique animations that were very fluid, as well as them speaking, having spoken dialogue while doing these attacks. Now, of course, this is something that would become more commonplace later with games like Star Ocean and the like, but in the early days, in that 95, 96 era on the PlayStation Japan, this was relatively unheard of. Arc the Lad would be another landmark for Working Designs, for both good and bad reasons. Arc the Lad Collection is one of the best examples of Victor Ireland's dedication to the Working Designs fans. This collection of games, by the time they came out in 2002, were already obsolete. And as I understand it, Sony had a very strict policy about releasing older games, and that's one of the reasons why they came out as a collection. This was Victor Ireland's way of giving the fans something that he had promised them and fulfilling that promise by releasing these games. And it was a gamble because these were old games. Nobody knew if they were going to sell well or not. Luckily, they did. They ended up selling very well for Working Designs, as well as the Lunar games did. And it was a very big risk for Victor Ireland and Working Designs, but there ended up being a reward. The following month at E3, Working Designs announced their intention to localize a game from the popular Goemon series for the PlayStation 2, Boken Jidai Katsugeki Goemon, which would later be released under the name Mystical Ninja Goemon. This would never come to pass, however, as Sony would not approve the game's release. This decision would be a devastating blow for Working Designs.
In the early 2000s, around 2002 and 3, Working Designs fell under the weight of their own pursuit of perfection. Their goal of creating a fantastic product and putting out something special for the consumer was what led to long delays and what would ultimately be an unsustainable business model for the company.
And it would be 2 years until Working Designs would publish their next and final games on the PlayStation 2. On December 7th, 2004, Growlancer Generations would be published on the PlayStation 2. It was to be Working Designs' final release. The Growlancer games are actually the spiritual successors to another series of tactical RPG games in Japan called Landgreiser. Growlancer Generations is a collection of Growlancer 2 and 3, and as Working Designs does, they added things to this game to make it better. They added an auto battle function to the game. They gave you the ability to turn off dialogue on select characters in the game. And the other cool thing that they added was the special features. You could access the art gallery, music, as well as voice outtakes. The other thing about the game itself, the Growlancer games, I should say, was that these games, like Vanguard Bandits, had that option of you choosing branching paths. So again, you get another game by Working Designs that has very high replayability. Growlancer Generations was well received, but the toll it took on Working Designs would be one that they would not recover from.
A perfect example of the non-sustainability of what was happening to Working Designs was the release of Growlancer Generations in 2003, which would ultimately be their last release. They were forced, because of delays, to release Growlancer 2 and 3 together in one set. And they still put essentially double the effort because they had intended on releasing them individually. But because of the dual release, and even though it sold well, it's not a sustainable model. They can't justify that effort put into it. And it had been over a year since their last release.
The restrictions that Sony put on them for the release of Growlancer Generations was devastating. Originally, they had planned to release these games individually. They had to pack them in together as a collection, on top of having to make a deluxe edition of the game as well as just a game-only version of the game. It really hurt them.
Now this was great for the collector, but not so great for Working Designs, because you have to keep in mind that individual releases create more revenue, whereas if you put everything together, you kind of take it at a loss.
Victor Ireland would always say that the Sony PlayStation and its difficult approval processes would make things hard for Working Designs to continue forward.
Sony kind of still had their own quality control, and the niche games that Working Designs wanted to release on the PlayStation usually found themselves to be 3, 4, 5 years old. And in PlayStation's eyes, if they were going to be releasing games that old, they needed to really make it worthwhile.
You also have to factor in that around this time the market was changing and Japanese companies like Atlus and Exceed were starting to do their own localization. So what Working Designs was doing wasn't rare anymore. It started to become a common practice.
If you are putting out this much cost to create something wonderful and unique, ultimately you're not going to recoup on those costs with revenues. And you may actually, with the success you've shown up to this point, create new competitors in the marketplace that will try to take away some of that differentiation that you have established. Other companies were putting out RPGs. Other companies were taking advantage of what essentially Working Designs had done, localizing Japanese role-playing games with skill.
This had to have been a very difficult time for Victor Ireland and Working Designs. Bittersweet, probably. They had released Growlancer Generations to a very positive reception from the gaming community, but they lost so much money in the process. Their relationship with Sony was pretty much in the toilet at this point, and all these different companies cropping up and kind of stealing their thunder. the writing was on the wall.
So ultimately, while it was well received, sold pretty well, and was again a gold standard for working designs and for RPG console releases, it would be the last of Working Designs.
1 year later, on December 12, 2005, Working Designs would officially close its doors. When asked about the company's demise 2 days later in an interview with GameSpot, Victor Ireland had this to say: "Packaging Ground Lancer 2 and 3 together, doubling our costs and localization time, and having our profits in one fell swoop wounded us. Goemon not getting approved was the end. At that point, it was clear that the kinds of games that we do and the manner that we do them would no longer be a guarantee of approval. And if I can't use my 15 plus years of experience to pick games I know will sell and get them approved, what am I doing? What are we doing?" The majority shareholders in Working Designs voted to stop the nonsense there. I can't say I blame them. They'd lost enough money in 3 years prior while we tried to iron it out. Though their end would be unceremonious, their contributions to gaming, specifically the RPG genre, were not.
As the years went on, it became very prevalent that, and very obvious that Working Designs should be thanked, and its legacy is that it treated video games as something that should be respected as an art form. Everything from its presentation to its translation where necessary to the package you hold in your hand, much like an album. They treated it with respect and the art form that it truly was.
What Victor Ireland and Working Designs did for the RPG and niche gaming community is something that quite possibly will never be replicated.
Working Designs games always felt like you were picking up a very rare collectible, a piece of memorabilia. It kind of went beyond being a game. It was kind of like a showcase title. And I always felt when I was growing up, when I saw a Working Design game, I said, I don't really know what it is, but it's bound to be amazing.
They raised the bar on localization. And they did it without degrading the quality of the games, but enhancing them.
And they cared about what they did, and they cared about video games. And I mean, almost to the detriment of their own company, they made sure that they put in the effort and made something sustainable. So the history of Working Designs and the legacy of Working Designs is undeniable. They put out fantastic products, and they showed the world, the English-speaking world, what Japanese RPGs and Japanese-style games really were.
The collectibles really made you feel like you weren't just buying a video game. You were kind of like investing in something.
When you bought a game from Working Designs, they not only wanted you to feel that you got all your money's worth and then some, they wanted you to feel that you had something unique. And even more so than that, when you bought a game from Working Designs, they wanted you to have an experience and a connection with them. Though Working Designs might be overlooked for their role in helping to bring JRPGs to the mainstream, their legacy would live on. In July of 2006, Victor Ireland would start a new video game publishing company called Gaijin Works. Its focus would be RPG and niche games from Japan. Working Designs is gone now, and even though it's not the same, their spirit does still kind of live on through Gaijin Works.